But what was coming home like for you last week?
Oh, it was surreal. You've been gone for so long, and I was in Omaha for almost about 105 days total, and it was emotional driving home.
I'm sure.
Just getting into the city limits of Liberty was emotional for me, and then driving up to my house for the first time, being in my house, walking into the door of my house, and it was surreal. And this is my third or fourth day at home, and it's still shocking to me that I'm here, and being here at work is surreal for me now, and it's just the best medicine I could have received at this point of my journey. So
to recap, you were diagnosed with leukemia a year ago, basically, but the bone marrow transplant kept you in Omaha for 4 months, correct?
That's correct.
And in isolation for, I think it turned out to be 95 days?
Sort of, yeah. What they do, I went through 9 rounds of chemotherapy here in Liberty, and then that was from May until December. I actually reached remission in July, which is their goal is to get you to remission pretty quickly so they can start the bone marrow process, the donor process. That can take a long time. We found a donor who is a young male overseas. I don't know anything about him, and we'll hopefully get to contact him within a year from now and get to meet him. But then I went to Omaha. We checked into the hospital on January the 11th. Had to go through some conditioning treatment before the transplant, so I had to do some radiation and some chemotherapy through that. And then the transplant itself happened on Friday, January the 17th. And then from that point, they watch you very closely for 100 days, and they won't let you go until they know you are doing well and that your counts are good. And so they actually let me go home on day 98, which was awesome, and feeling great. I'm exercising again. Been exercising for about the last 4 weeks. All my blood counts look good. And my last bone marrow biopsy was last week, and it came back cancer-free. And I'm 100% donor, which is what they want before you leave. And so things look very good. And I'm still not out of the woods per se, but they'll be watching me very closely for about the next 2 years. And I'll still have weekly appointments with my oncologist here in Liberty to check all my blood levels and that kind of thing. So it's a new normal for me. But knowing that I can have that normal here at home now is unbelievable. So,
did you ever feel like you wouldn't make it, that it wasn't worth going through all of that?
There was one day, and it happened on the very first day I received radiation was Monday the 12th of January. And I had just gotten back from my first radiation treatment, and for my condition, it's total body irradiation. It's not just focused on one cell where a tumor is, that kind of thing. It was a complete body radiation. And that Monday, I had to do that twice a day for 3 days. And after the very first morning session of that, I came back to my room, and I was in bad shape, and it was probably the most pain and suffering I've ever had in my entire life. And at one point, I literally thought I was going to meet my grandmother at one point in heaven. And it was so hard for me at that point to deal with. But I'll tell you a really interesting story about what got me through that. So I came out and was laying in my bed and started to fall asleep, and my housekeeper came in and started singing old Baptist hymnals that I had known growing up. And then my wife started singing with her because she knew those songs too. And then I fell asleep. So I woke up about 2 hours later, and I asked Christy, I said, was I dreaming? Were you guys singing or something? And she goes, yeah, the housekeeper came in and she knew all these songs that we used to grow up with. And guess what her name was? Her name was Peace.
Really?
And she was from Africa. And at that point, I knew that God was taking care of me, and that that everything was going to be all right. But that day was probably the toughest day I ever experienced in Omaha and in my life. And but somewhere around the Super Bowl, after we were able to check out of the hospital on January 30th, and then a couple of days after the Super Bowl, I started getting my appetite back and started turning a corner for the better. And from then on, it's been pretty much smooth sailing, except for just maybe 1 or 2 little bumps in the road. And other than that, everything's went great. So.
Throughout this last year, you were very transparent on Facebook about how things were going and keeping people up to date. But your faith really came to the front. Talk about that a little bit, if you
Absolutely.
would, about what that's meant to you.
That's been the biggest thing that got me through it. And from the very beginning, I had a lot of questions as to what's going on, what's happening to me. I don't understand why. I exercised, I ate well, I took care of myself, and then boom, out of nowhere, a doctor's in your room saying you've got leukemia and you've got a kind of a rare form that we got to get going on this right away. And I don't know if anybody's ever experienced news that rocks your world, but that news rocked my world a year ago. And I just remember at that point, I remember praying, and God just said, "Don't worry about this. I've got this." And he didn't say that I'm going to take care of this specific part of the journey. I want to take this. It left a lot of discretion, and he did. There were so many mountains we climbed this last year that it was the only way I can explain it is that God took me over the mountains that we encountered, and I owe my life to him. And to be able to find a donor as quickly as we could, and actually we found 3 that were potential 10 out of 10 matches that my doctor was able to pick from. That he wanted there were certain criteria he wanted, and he found one that met all 3 of those criteria that he wanted, and was able to get that donor for me. And the donor was willing and able, and that's something that I'll never forget as well. It's just been a series of miracles that have happened throughout this last year that's kept me going and helped me see some light at the end of the tunnel, kind of thing.
There's so many details. I wish we had more time to talk about each and every one of them. But let's wrap up this by talking about where do you go now? Going forward, are you returning to work on a full-time basis, coaching tennis, SID stuff? What's the going forward plan?
Right now, the doctor wants me to start kind of small and do maybe 2 or 3 days a week in the office. The good thing about, sadly to say, the tennis season's over. But the good thing is that tennis won't start till the fall, so I have another couple of months to recover for that kind of a grind. The only thing now is I have to meet with my oncologist weekly here, and then I'll have to go back to Omaha maybe once a month, and then maybe once every 2 months and that kind of thing for checkups and that sort of deal. But I'm officially back to work here at Jewel, and that means that's almost that, and being home with my family is the best medicine I can have right now. And I started, like I said, I started exercising a few weeks ago, and I want to try to have not as much fatigue as I can. Have to be really careful in the sun. And the great part about having 2 old, teenage boys is the doctor did tell me I can't mow and I can't garden, and so according to them, I don't have to do that forever. So,
well, you don't have to mow or at my house, but if you want to send your boys, that's fine.
That sounds good. But
again, I know we said final thoughts, but in a couple of words, what has this whole experience added up to for you?
It's deepened my faith, and that's the biggest part is seeing how. And it's taught me how, not necessarily how strong I am, but when I rely on God, seeing how strong I can be with his help. Because there were a lot of there were seriously a lot of days, Rick, where, I'd be in the hospital bed and I couldn't even think. It hurt so bad just to think or even open my eyes. And, I know this may sound crazy, but I will cherish those moments, because I knew during those moments I could just close my eyes and find God, and I would find peace at that point. And that carried me through. And now being home and being with my boys and being with my family and my wife, and that in and of itself has meant the last 3 days for me has just flown by being home. And the other part is it's so hard for me now to take things for granted. Just the fact I can't take my home for granted anymore. Being with my boys, I can't take that for granted anymore. My work, my job here at Jewel, I will never take for granted again. And there's just so many things that have been put into perspective for me over the last year that I will never forget.